starten wir. So, thank you for this kind introduction. And yes, I will present in English. And it will be a bit hard to continue talking about Mozambique after the last presentation of Maria Paula Menezes, which was really stunning. And before I start, I have to say that I'm not an expert on Mozambican comics. I worked, as Peter already mentioned, I worked on Brazilian comics. And the topic of Sergio Zimba just came to me after Googling. I just looked for comics from Mozambique, and then I found the comics and the work of Sergio Zimba. And I was really curious about him and about his comments on COVID-19, because he already commented in a visual way on HIV and on AIDS in Mozambique. So he is in this topic of healthcare, working on healthcare via his graphic narratives in newspapers, actually. So that's why today's topic is on his newspaper comics, and I will show you the presentation in a second. Can you see that? Okay. Good. So the following presentation deals with the educational comics, or in German, Sachcomics, of the Mozambican artist Sergio Zimba, especially, as I already said, in the context of the current pandemic situation caused by COVID-19. In order to better classify the artist's work, we will first take a look at comics from and comic research on Africa, especially in their repercussion within the German language comic landscape. Before then going on to discuss the special situation in Lusophone Africa, exemplified by the works of the Mozambican cartoonist Sergio Zimba. African countries are rarely represented in the German comic landscape. If you enter the search word Africa on the website of the German publishing house Avant, after all one of the largest local houses for German language and international comics, the first thing you see is Jean's fast series, The Rabbi's Cat, which tells the story of the cat of an Algerian rabbi, but the author anyway is French. A second book which appears as a result of the search is Papa in Africa by the South African Anton Kennemeyer, in which the author satirizes the racism of the Tintin series. The situation at other publishers is not really different. A similar search at Schreiber und Leser, another big German publishing house, leads to Italian comics around Corto Maltese. At Carlsen, another publishing house, to comics around Spirou and Fantasio, both exemplify a past colonial romanticism. The only German publishing house that sells a comic from Africa is Reprodukt. The comic book Aya, by the Ivorian illustrator Marguerite Aboué, created in collaboration with the French Clément Aubrery. The book describes Aya's life in the Ivory Coast, or more precisely in the metropolis of Abidjan. Other comics from Lusophone Africa, or comics from Lusophone Africa, are not to be found at any of the German comic publishers. At least the German comic artist Birgit Weihe has dealt with Mozambique and Mozambican guest workers in the GDR, and her comic Mad Germanis is published by Avant Verlag. Within German and English language comic research, the situation is not fundamentally different. In cooperation with Basler Afrika Bibliographien and the University of Basel, an exhibition on African comics was conceived in 2015, which resulted in the exhibition catalogue Kaboom! African Comics in Focus, which was published in a second, completely revised edition in 2020. 11 years earlier, Johan Land published an English language anthology entitled Cartooning in Africa. Both books deal, at least marginally, with comics from Angola and Mozambique too. This lack of interest in African comics in general and in Luso-African comics in particular is opposed by intensive networking among Mozambican and Angolan comic artists, whether in the context of the annual Luanda Cartoon Fair or in the context of joint publications and anthologies such as the fanzine BDLP under Desenhada de Língua Portuguesa, of which 5 issues were published between 2010 and 2015. The aforementioned Rwanda Cartoon Fair is held in Angola, where a considerable comic scene has established, especially around the Studio Olindomar, a publishing house owned by 2 brothers, Olimpio and Lindomar de Souza. The BDLP series features comics from Portugal, Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, and Cape Verde. However, comics and cartoons were for a long time not a medium for entertainment in Angola and Mozambique, but rather a means of informing the population, especially during the struggle for independence from Portuguese colonial power. In Angola, for example, the MPLA, Movimento Popular de Libertação de Angola, published a comic strip to motivate the population to take a united stand against the occupying forces. The album is entitled From Slavery to Freedom, a Story from Angola, and shows, through the story of 2 young people, that it is possible to stand united against the occupiers, who are perceived as overpowering, but that this requires not only courage and fighting spirit, but also adequate education in local history and socialist theory. In Mozambique too, comics were used during the period of independence to educate the population in the party's ideology. Thus, a character was created who opposed all ideas of the revolution, and we already met him. It's Chico. This enemy of the revolution could be found in magazines, on leaflets, on posters, and was intended to induce the population to behave in accordance with the ideas of the Frelimo Party, the Frente de Libertação de Mozambique. At first glance, it seems hardly surprising that the comic strip was used as a medium for educating the masses, given that 40 years ago, 1980, the national literacy rate in Mozambique averaged 27%, with only 12% of women being literate, which is quite shocking, and about 44% of men. Even in 2017, the literacy rate reached only about 60%, 60.7%, with a slight alignment between men with 72% and women with 50%. This trend of alignment is even more pronounced among young people between 15 and 24, where 77% of men and 65% of women are literate. So there is a progress, a huge progress actually. In this context, the comic strip acts as an accessible means of communication, or an easy to use means of communication, enabling an understanding of the situation described, even without being, even without being proficient in the Portuguese written language. However, this overlooks the fact that it is precisely the interaction between text and image which is central to comics, that tends to increase the level of complexity, so that reading comics requires distinct skills. The comparatively low literacy rate, which still plagues Mozambique, is undoubtedly one of the reasons why non-fiction or educational comics clearly outweigh entertainment comics. If the picture or the sequence of pictures is clearly drawn, at least a basic understanding is possible without having to consult the text, especially since the examples at hand usually consist of 1 or 2 panels. Another central reason for the low number of entertainment comics is to be seen in the publishing industry. Pakalen in 2009, for example, points to reduced opportunities for publishing comics and cartoons, which in Mozambique means that young illustrators are no longer able to position themselves in the market. For example, he reports on a visit to Maputo, during which numerous works by young artists were presented to him, and immediately notes with disillusionment that, quote, the artists have been unable to get anyone to publish them, as their commercial viability is uncertain, end of quote. The author sees a third reason for the low circulation of even educational comics in a reduced experience of NGOs in using comics as a tool for public education, as well as the lack of organization in marketing the artist's skills on the one hand and the medium itself on the other. Before I now turn to the COVID-19 comics by Sergio Zimba, a brief excursus is needed on questions of definition. What is actually meant when talking about educational comics, and is it possible to identify a first moment when knowledge was transferred via comics? Urs Hangartner writes in the anthology Wissen durch Bilder, Knowledge Through Images, which he published together with Felix Keller and Dorothea Oechslin, that the first appearance of so-called non-fiction comics can be observed in the USA in the 1940s. Numerous comics were published with the intention to educate a broad mass. On the one hand, for personality development, on the other hand, to illustrate technical processes and thus to train a huge number of people in these processes in a short time. This is contrasted by contemporary educational comics, which attempt to illustrate rather abstract knowledge and convey it in this way. In fact, the editors of the above-mentioned anthology refer to a current European situation when they write, quote, "The hopes associated with educational comics as a means of disseminating knowledge are evident. That the immediate, obvious power of images combined with good stories will offer new opportunities to communicate knowledge, and now it's interesting, in a stimulating and successful way in a media-saturated and culturally diverse society." As I already said, the motivation to work with educational comics in Mozambique has a completely different starting point, so that the medium in question should be defined more generally, I quote Hangartner again, as a special area within the medium where the intention of the educational can be identified. According to the author, non-fiction comics aim to, quote, inform, mediate, instruct, etc., and in addition create emotional effects, end of quote. In his book, Comics and Sequential Art, Will Eisner distinguishes between two different types of comics with an explanatory or educational function. Technical instructional comics are those, quote, in which the procedure to be learned is shown from the reader's point of view, end of quote. Whereas attitudinal instruction comics are more aimed at identification evoked by the acting out or dramatization in a sequence of pictures, end of quote. The first type explains a sequence of steps, of concrete actions, which already have a process character from the outset. The second type wants to evoke within the reader a certain attitude towards a certain task by depicting scenes that are partly parodistically exaggerated. Eisner writes in two places that this often succeeds through exaggeration. And I quote Eisner again, "The broad generalization of artwork permits exaggeration, which can more quickly make the point and influence the reader." End of quote. And he continues, in the case, quote Eisner again, "in the case of a purely instructional comic, especially in the case of a behavioral or attitudinal piece, the specifics of the information are frequently overly larded with humor, exaggeration, to attract the reader's attention, convey relevance, and set up visual analogies and recognizable life situations. This inserts entertainment into technical work." End of quote. If we now look at Zimba's work, and that's him, by the way, the very aspects that Eisner addresses in the above quotation become apparent. That is, humorous exaggeration in order to attract the reader's attention, to convey relevance, and to set up visual analogies to familiar situations from one's own life. Sérgio Zimba was born in 1963 in Moamba in the hinterland of Maputo in Mozambique. Since the 1980s, he has been working as a cartoonist for Jornal Domingo, and 8 books have been published since then with his drawings, namely the ones you can see on the slide. In his last book from 2011, As Camisinhas, or in English, Condoms, Zimba already uses a design strategy that he will take up again 9 years later in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The upper part of the panel contains a short information text in written Portuguese and in a sober and objective style. pointing out the correct behavior. Underneath, it opens the presentation of a situation in which the previous statement is satirized. In the example, the information text reads as follows. Condoms are very sensitive products. They have an expiry date and may only be used once. This explanation is then contrasted with a scene in which a woman offers used condoms for sale. She says, used condoms for sale, 4 pieces for 500 meticals. The contrast between the two speech acts is also enhanced by the choice of language. While the official announcement is rendered in correct Portuguese, the market woman uses a colloquial language in which Portuguese elements are mixed with local Bantu languages, which suggests a strong identification on the part of the reader. The panel closes at the bottom of the picture with a comment, maybe by the narrator or cartoonist, which, referring to the scene portrait, soberly states, "Oops, if this fashion spreads, we are screwed." But what is actually not sold in this country? The speaker's commentary brings the two levels together as he classifies the woman's behavior as wrong on the one hand, but on the other hand reveals that he too is a citizen of Mozambique and is very familiar with the social reality. In addition, his speech contains oral elements and is thus closer to the reader than the official written statement at the top of the picture. It is, above all, through this final bridge between the two horizons that the educational function of the cartoon is achieved. This strategy is also expressed in other panels of the album. I'll do them in a second, but just to say, it is really important to point out this strategy of Zimba's because in other contexts, such as the social critical series Mafenya, he completely dispenses with headings and captions. So this is just in the context of HIV and COVID-19. In this case, the left panel says in the headline, "Be faithful to your partner." This expression is not only an anti-AIDS slogan, but first and foremost, an appeal to good morals and good behavior. And then we can read the speech bubble of the man who is thinking, "I should not have told my lover that I was on holiday. Now she keeps me here. My wife does not know where I am. The worst thing is that my lover won't use a condom. She always says," and now we have spoken language, not in Portuguese. The Portuguese translation is in the subtitle, "I like meat on meat." And the caption says, "Morals, the worst thing is to catch the HIV virus and then in fact a poor wife at home with it." And on the right side, the headline says, "The HIV positive person is a person suffering from AIDS or a person suffering from AIDS must eat well in order to regain the energy that the virus withdraws from their bodies." And the man says, "That's it. Eat, my son, eat. The fact that you are HIV positive is not the end of the world. I'm going to work. I've put 200 escudos in your room if you want to go out." "Yes, Dad." But the son thinks, "I don't know what will happen to me if the old man finds out that all this is just a farce and that I don't have AIDS, not a damn thing." And then the caption again, summarizing a really bad joke, or commenting actually, a really bad joke. AIDS is a serious and severe disease and should never be the basis for amusing behavior. So as you can see, he uses this visual strategy that he will use again in the COVID-19 drawings, which I will present in a second. Of the 25 cartoons Sérgio Zimba has published in Jornal Domingo since the end of April, 12 deal with Corona. In addition to these, 5 more can be found online, but their exact origin is not completely clear. In the drawings, Zimba addresses the acronym COVID, the protective measures that can be taken to reduce the number of infections, like wearing a protective mask, social distancing, washing hands regularly, and avoiding contact, and the consequences of living in domestic quarantine. In Mozambique, schools were closed already on March 23rd, and gatherings of more than 50 people were banned. The state of emergency was declared on April 1st and lasted until July 29, after which a gradual opening in 3 phases took place. Especially in April, The pictures seem to be particularly aimed at supporting general morale during the restrictions that applied from April 1st. The two comic strips which I'm going to show now illustrate this focus. The first picture shows two prison inmates who are angry about the fact that even outside prison, people take the right to lock themselves up at home. Here, humoristically, a reinterpretation of punishment as a privilege is worked out, and a resulting appreciation of it. The act of copying this privilege by persons who have not been legally sentenced to it is seen by the two cellmates as presumptuous, and they discuss possible criminal prosecution. At the bottom of the picture, the narrator's mediating voice can once again be read. My fellow citizens, oh, sorry, I didn't give you the translations. So, hey Nando, how can we prosecute those people out there who lock themselves in their homes? This is an unlawful presumption of our status. It is a piracy of our condition, a plagiarism, an imitation. And he even has the law book on his bed, by the way. And Nando answering, you're quite right, doctor. We are the ones who have the right to be locked away. And then the caption says, my fellow citizens, don't be intimidated by those two. Lock yourselves up well and very well in your homes. Another cartoon, maybe less humorous, but with a strong sense of empathy, promotes the observance of domestic quarantine as well. A young man lies smiling in bed and dreams of being in a bar speaking with a young woman who obviously adores him, saying, you're the greatest, my vicino. Next to the bed is an older woman, possibly his mother, who wonders what that grin of her dreaming son might mean. Since she calls him a scoundrel, it can be assumed that she correctly guesses the nature of the dream. At the lower edge of the picture, the narrator intervenes again in the events and announces in a sensible manner, stay at home with the family, my dears. The year has plenty of Fridays left to have fun. That was in April, he was optimistic. While the two panels advertise the statal corona measures in a rather general way, Zimba also addresses very concrete problems of everyday life in quarantine. For example, the shortage of food. In his drawings, he repeatedly calls for a sparing use of food, otherwise alternative solutions will have to be found that may surprise the rest of the family. In the comic strip of April 14th, for example, old Matus, a retired nurse, uses saline solution, which he hoards at home, together with needles and other material, in case his food supplies are used up before the quarantine ends. So he's thinking, I've already spent all my money to buy food for the quarantine, but with all the greedy ones I have here in the house, I don't know if it will last until the end. They eat as they please. I have to think of an alternative. And indeed, he appears in the house, the son asking, what's that, Papa? And he says it's saline solution, Zito, for you and your mother when we are left without food here in the house. I got a good supply, needles and all. And the caption, as I already mentioned, says, fellow citizens, save food during the quarantine. Another father is already in the situation where both the food he bought and his available money have been used up, and he's now desperately looking for a way to feed his family. Thinking, I've always said to Susanna and to our children, save food, but nothing. They have already eaten the whole casserole of Kirill, and I have no penny left. Think of a solution, Arsenio. Think. A passing cat gives him the idea of slaughtering it and telling the family that he brought the fresh meat from the butcher. The narrator comments ironically on this idea with the words, damn coronavirus. Now it is already changing the diet of whole families. And a new call for saving food. From May onwards, the drawings no longer focus so much on domestic quarantine, but on the correct handling of the virus, as the two comic strips, which I will discuss now, illustrate. The first comic shows a man in his front garden where there is a large eucalyptus tree, but it no longer has any leaves. The man complains to another man who wears uniform trousers, a cap, and a gun, that in the evening, when he went to bed, all leaves were still on the tree. The armed man replies in horror, "What? Those rascals! I'll shoot them." The dialogue becomes understandable only through the headline in which the narrator situates the scene. He writes that many people believe that fresh breath through eucalyptus leaves is a way to prevent the coronavirus. This could lead to scenes like the one shown above, but is wrong. At the bottom of the picture, the misbelief is corrected by the narrator, clarifying, "Dear fellow citizens, use your masks in densely populated areas and on public transport. They prevent infection." Other measures against the virus, such as regular hand washing, are also discussed. In a comic strip published at the end of May, a married couple is shown going to bed in the evening. The woman is already in bed. The man wants to follow her. But before he can do so, she wordlessly points out to him that he should use the washing facilities next to the bed to carefully clean his hands before sleep. Once again, the caption explains the situation and places the image in a larger context of an increasingly careless attitude towards protective measures. These protective measures also include social distancing. Sergio Zimba deals with this in a humorous way in the two drawings shown next. The first picture shows a man who uses the demand for distance to justify why he won't take a shower. In fact, only the woman's voice can be read, but indirectly it also summarizes the man's words. Haha, as if Dr. Rosa Maleni had said that it was also necessary to regulate the distance from the bathing water. Do you think you can make fun of me, Victor? Get in the shower now. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? While the headline provides an introductory explanation to the situation, the caption serves once again to call on the citizens of Mozambique to behave correctly in dealing with the pandemic. The lack of social distancing is still the Achilles heel in preventing COVID-19 in the country. Dear fellow citizens, avoid gatherings for the good of all. Similarly humorous is the second picture, in which a young woman takes an opossum from Mato Grosso for a walk. In this picture too, it is about the fact that the rules of conduct for protection against the coronavirus are being increasingly disregarded, and that individuals are therefore forced to take radical measures to protect themselves. It says social distancing is increasingly ignored, but there are those who have already solved the problem by using gambas, or opossums, from Mato Grosso, Brazil. Will it really be necessary to import gambas now? And the word gamba is explained in a footnote again as an animal that emits a really bad smell. The rhetorical question is taken up in the caption again with the remark that it would be sufficient not to import gambas, but to keep social distancing as a way of preventing the coronavirus. Finally, Zimba also deals with rumors and fake news around the pandemic and corrects them in his drawings. In the comic strip of May 2nd, for example, a man can be seen urging a group of young people to go home immediately, arguing that COVID stands for a choice between life and death. My children, do you know what COVID is? Just listen to what Professor Langer says. COVID is a word composed by agglutination. Co stands for cova, grave, and vid for vida, life. Do you want the grave or the life? Go home now. Gang of unarmed insurgents. This false explanation is corrected in the caption together with a call to dutifully follow the rules of the state of emergency. In contrast to the comics about the HIV virus in the country, where the headline is an official statement, the comics on COVID-19 show a slightly different strategy. Instead of official announcements, the headline now introduces the situation more strongly, and by doing so operates in an explanatory way and is often characterized by a judgmental and ironic undertone. Finally, the caption conveys the correct rules of conduct or information about the pandemic in a sober and objective style. As in the earlier health comics, the artist in the current productions also reveals himself as a simple Mozambican citizen who is aware of the worries and needs of the broad population, perhaps even feels them himself, but who nevertheless calls for a reflected and reasonable behavior. In the present comics, this is clearly recognizable by the address "My dearest" or "Dear fellow citizens," which was used in almost every one of the analyzed comics. This suggested proximity to the readers may create a greater willingness to follow the appeals inscribed in the pictures. In summary, Sergio Zimba plays a central role in informing Mozambique citizens about state norms of behavior and the correct handling of a threat in an epidemic or pandemic situation. His comics are extremely popular and reach a large number of people. Nevertheless, Zimba laments the low interest in comics in general and in his work in particular. In interviews over the past few months, he has repeatedly commented that his work is not sufficiently appreciated. Although he is described as the country's greatest cartoonist, the title does not translate into artistic or monetary recognition, and his images, unlike pieces of music, for example, are not used for public awareness campaigns. His images are also not used in advertising, although they are extremely popular, Zimba says. The cartoon, as an art form, is largely ignored by cultural institutions in Mozambique, as evidenced by the fact that no comic artists are invited to national cultural festivals so far, and that cartoons are often not found in newspapers or other means of communication, at most as an add-on to other supposedly more important content. Oops. Right. In his drawings, Zimba takes up this apparently low interest in comics and the lack of reading habits or routines in dealing with the medium. Small arrows may guide the reader through the various speech bubbles to show the order in which the text should be read. As you can see, whoops, why is it not working? As you can see here. Even small additional notes in the style of stage directions are necessary to make it clear whether a sentence was spoken aloud and therefore audible to everyone, or whether it was spoken quietly in private. And in this example, it says, in a domestic quarantine due to coronavirus somewhere in Matola, which is Maputo district, Miss Edith, and then the footnote says name of his secretary in the company. I need the documents from this business I made with the South Africans. And then it says, read this text in low voice. Something is not right here. And then the language changes. Those guys must have headbutted me. And the Portuguese version is in the footnote again. And the daughter to his side says, but Dad, this is our home. That's Mom over there, geez. And she's just thinking, Edith, me? And in a compassionate way, the narrator says, it's not easy to be locked up at home, but it's one of the most effective measures to prevent the coronavirus. As far as the drawing style is concerned, one can speak of a realistic rather than an iconic abstract representation of the figures. This tends to make readers identify less strongly with the figures depicted, according to Scott McCloud, and situations are perceived as less universal and more specific. This stylistic decision is quite appropriate, considering the humorous approach to the educational function of the drawings, since the majority of the people depicted behave incorrectly, so that identification on the part of the reader is not at all desired. By humorously exposing the depicted behavior as wrong, the readers should distinguish themselves from the people in the picture and either be proud of their already correct behavior, or, if they maybe recognize themselves just a little bit in the drawn situation, willingly correct their previously wrong behavior. Just as Eisner created an anti-hero in the war years in the US with G.I. Joe Dope, who fails at everything, Zimba also creates a, and I quote Hungartner again, a fool who fails at everything and who, didactically valuable, learns the right thing from his example of failure. A quick look at Angola can be helpful to contextualize Zimba's drawing even better. An Angolan cartoonist who also published his drawings in daily newspapers and enjoys great fame and popularity is Sérgio Zimba. In their cartoons, both artists show figures who are misbehaving in the current pandemic situation, thus conveying their critical message through an ironic break. For his criticism, Zimba uses a stable figure who takes advantage of the ailing economic and political situation and does not shy away from asking critical questions to officials of the executive. Mankiko o imbumbado. In English, something like Mankiko lazybones. Sérgio Zimba's criticism is therefore directed less at the misconduct of individual citizens and more at the corrupt and problematic government of Angola. This makes Zimba's COVID-19 comics much more political than those of Mozambican Sérgio Zimba. Especially in the context of the AIDS and COVID-19 crisis, Sergio Zimba can be seen as a cartoonist who uses the genre of non-fiction comics or educational comics to indirectly support public health campaigns and wants to contribute with his pictures to a broad public health education of the population of Mozambique, where many people, especially the elderly, are poorly or not at all literate in Portuguese. This attitude is also expressed by Zimba himself. And I quote from a newspaper report on Sergio Zimba, "For Zimba, the cartoon is a means of social intervention, and it reaches everyone, including those who can neither read nor write, because drawing itself is a strong means of communication." However, it must be clearly emphasized that Sergio Zimba's work is not exhausted in this form of educational comic. There are also numerous political and socio-critical drawings by him, and by choosing the medium of the picture and the often bilingual use of text, he succeeds not only in reaching a readership that tends to be excluded from usual Portuguese language print media, but also in initiating a health political and socio-critical awareness among them. And that's it. That's the literature I used. Thanks for your attention, and I'm really curious about the discussion and your thoughts and ideas on Sergio Zimba's work. Thank you.
All right. Many thanks, Janek, for this very inspiring talk and actually for contextualizing Zimba's work in African and Luso-African comics in general, which was very interesting to have this context, and then also the comparative approach at the end, which I found quite fascinating, how different the approach actually is, both in the aesthetics as well as in the actual form of commenting on these social problems, which is quite different. Not so the second one, not so the didactic, but rather, let's say, in a more almost cynical manner, representing it as kind of a cynical humor to also actually show a situation that is being critiqued. My question would be, before we open for other questions, my question would be, is there some sort of a project of Zimba's? Because it actually seems to be almost like a state program. It's kind of a little bit the politics that a lot of countries actually implemented, and basically to follow the rules via comics. And I mean, in the interview, it was called social intervention, and it seems like a very didactical, almost governmentally kind of approved sort of intervention. And then also, I mean, the publication was in the Jornal Domingo usually, so that was kind of a big readership there as well. And I was wondering if you know anything about these contexts, and also particularly taking into account that he as a great artist that he really is. I mean, that became so evident in your demonstration of his comics, that he is not able to really make much money as an artist. So I would wonder if that might also have some economic reasons as well. But of course, he seems to be a responsible person as well. But maybe you could comment on all of these aspects a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Indeed, he's really didactic and explanatory in his work, but especially in the work on public health care, because in the internet you can also find parts of the book Mafenya, for example, who is more socio-critical. And I was lucky to get a copy of Lágrimas de Riso, which is more on the everyday life in Mozambique as well. And those comics are not that didactical. I think there he's always just taking a scene from everyday life in Mozambique and presenting it in a humorous way. But still his work, all his work happens to be published in Jornal Domingo. Like all the books are collections of his work from Jornal Domingo. And he started as, not as an official cartoonist of the government, but I read something that his early career was connected to the government in the way that the idea was to teach the population about new regulations and behavior. So maybe, there is still this idea of teaching via pictures. And it's really individual. That's interesting when you compare Zimba to Pissarra, because as you already said, Pissarra's approach is completely different, more cynical, really, and much more political. Zimba is always focusing on the individual, even in the everyday life comics or cartoons, which are not about public health care or anything. It's just one scene, it's one spotlight into a household or to one street. So he's really close to the individuals, and maybe because of this, it's easy to get a didactic tone. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for clarifying this. And there are two questions already. First, Yasmin, and then Lea Hübner.
Yes, thank you, Janek. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. First of all, for in the first place of problematizing or bringing our attention to the fact that that there's a lack of African graphic narratives in German publishing houses. I'm really curious what Lea is going to say about that, because she's a translator and will hopefully have the opportunity to translate more African narratives to the German market in the future. And I think your lecture series is actually very, very important for this project that we all should have. So I'm really grateful for the whole lecture series in that sense. And I also wanted to thank you for bringing a different type of comics, or a different genre of comics, educational comics. I found it very interesting to see, and this is maybe more sort of a comment, but maybe you could comment on my comment if I understood that correctly, because I found it very interesting to see the quite fixed structure, in the sense that there is a first caption or first headline that goes into the topic and gives a humorous introduction to the topic, as I saw it. And then there is there are the pictures, of course, the images and the dialogues. Sometimes there are no dialogues, but normally there's the image, the representation, and the dialogues, which is humorous. But then it seems to me necessary that there's this second caption, which is serious and which really gives this moral advice to the recipients of the comics. I found that very well structured in all of the examples you brought us. That would be maybe more a comment or a question, if you would agree that this, for educational comics, you would have this kind of fixed structure. And then maybe it's just more of a curiosity. As I saw it in the examples you brought, there seems to be a gender-based division between correct and incorrect behavior. Maybe you could comment on that too. Thank you so much. That's really great.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Nice to see you. Uh, yeah, on the first question, I'm completely curious about Leah's opinion as well. So, and as she's going to have the next question, I'm sure we can discuss about the interest in African comics in the German publishing market and industry. On the question of the genre and educational comics, I had so many troubles with that because I'm still not sure if it really fits the definition of educational comics. If Zimba's work fits any definitions, actually, European theoretical academic definitions, because it is for sure not fictional. So it's not non-fiction. That's what I wanted to say. It is fiction because he comes up with a scene and giving the readers this fictional scene. It is educational for sure, but it's also entertainment, I think. So because sometimes you have the strict difference between entertainment comics and educational comics, but I think that's not really necessary to have this strict line between the two types, because it's entertaining and it's educational, and with the idea to change the attitudes of the population. And it is also a comic, which is another definition problem, because there are those definitions saying that a comic needs to be needs to have 2 panels at least, but there are other definitions saying that this is not really necessary. So I would say it is a comic, and it doesn't fit these are just some thoughts I had on the genre question. Even if you think about the German genre of Zeitungskarikatur, that wouldn't work neither. So it's a particular thing he does, and using the captions and the headings, interestingly enough, he does this only in the public healthcare work he's doing. In none of the other comics I've seen from Zimba, he uses headlines or captions. Maybe a headline, a small headline, a brief headline, just to give you the scene or the situation, but not in that extensive way he does in the comics I presented to you. And I think maybe the caption is to give you the routine, to make sure that the irony is fully understood by the readers. I'm not sure, but he presents a scene that is ironical, and to really make sure that the reader catches this irony, maybe he needs the subtitles or the caption. But I'm not quite sure about this. So the whole genre question is really hard to answer, and I think he's not fitting into the idea of educational comics, maybe. But he's close to the idea of educational comics, but not to the fullest. And the gender question would be another work, another study on Zimba, because there's a lot of gender cliche in his work. I'm sure you saw this and you realize this. And yes, usually the women are behaving in a good way. Not always. In this pandemic comics, they do. In the other comics, they also beat their husbands and stuff. So there is domestic violence, but also turned upside down, maybe. But yes, in most of the cases, the women do behave in a good way. And the way the women are drawn is also, as I already said, maybe a good starting point for another research on Sergio Zimba's work.
Just very quickly, could you stop the mode of sharing your screen? Then it'd be more easy to see.
I'm still sharing.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. Yes, how do I do that? I have a strange look of, here it is, okay. I'm so sorry, I thought I was already.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Leah, please, you have a question, right?
Hello. You can hear me. Okay. So thanks a lot, Janek, for this interesting speech. I part of agree with you on the question that mostly Zimba's works are not merely a cartoon, but some kind of sequential one picture comic, because there are so many layers of meanings, and to understand the final caption as a commentary function. So I think it's like what people are saying, then somebody is thinking there's a certain structure, a narrative structure in each of these pictures, and so I think it could be called one picture comic or something like that. It's really interesting question to define these these works. On the question of future African comics who could come to Europe, I know that there's a Portuguese publisher initiating a project, but it's still in the initial phase of trying to apply for funds. And so this is something absolutely, previous phase. We can't talk about some titles yet, but I think there should be some comics coming, because in general I observe that Portugal is trying to face the colonial past also in literature and in novels and stuff. So this is some topic absolutely due to come. And I wanted to comment that in Berliner Comic Colloquium there was once a speech, I think, held by Thomas Greven on African comic. That day I couldn't get there, I don't know, but perhaps there's still some research work made by Thomas one could share or agree to use, and more hints, like he also worked on that. And I wanted to ask you the question, Janek, if there's any connection of Zimba with colleagues in neighbor countries of Mozambique. Or is there any connection, like there's no scene like festivals or not even in culture events, but perhaps that could be a connection. So this would be something I would like to know. And also if there is the use of different other Mozambique languages, because there was sometimes we had to switch. And why did he choose this one? I don't know if I didn't get this at the beginning of your speech, but I imagine that there are several different languages, and he had to opt to make his decision. Why is it that one, and what did this mean for the other readers? So these are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and nice to see you too. That was quite a lot. I totally agree on the idea of, it's a nice idea, by the way, sequential one picture comics that fits maybe best. Yeah, and thanks for the hint on Thomas Greven and the Berliner Comic Colloquium. I will have a look into that. On your question about Zimba's connection to neighboring countries, I'm really curious about this. I can't really answer the question, but my impression is that he's not having too many connections, and he's not really collaborating. There is this huge comic fair in Luanda Cartoon, and this taking place every year, and it's really a huge thing with people coming from Brazil, coming from Portugal. And it's in Luanda, it's in Angola, and there are also people coming from Mozambique, but I never read that he is participating in Luanda Cartoon, and neither did he participate in the BIPoC series, for example. And there we have collaborations between Mozambican comic artists, just a few, or really just a few of them. But they do collaborate with Angolan and Cabo Verdean and Brazilian, Portuguese comic artists. Sergio Zimba is not really in that. He's not taking part in well, in this environment, I think. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm mistaken, maybe. But That's my impression so far, that he's really working on his own in the Jornal Domingo and just in Mozambique with focus on Mozambique and not really sharing the experiences of making or producing comics in Africa with other colleagues. Even in the social networks, for example, on Facebook, he has a Facebook profile, but he's not really using it, not really publishing stuff. Sergio Zimba, to the contrary, is really active on Facebook. He posts all his new drawings. And other artists like Nelo Tumbula, the one who hopefully is going to speak next week, from Angola as well, is really active in the social media and the social networks. Sergio Zimba is not. So yeah, I think he's not that connected, maybe. Oh, and the language question. I can't answer the language question, unfortunately. I don't know what language it is. I found a linguistic paper on Sergio Zimba's work, and even the linguistic paper didn't answer the question which language it is. It was just a social linguistic approach claiming that he is changing languages and why he's changing languages, but it didn't say which language he uses. So I was a bit frustrated with that paper, actually, because I was hoping to find the answer. And I think it has to be a mixture, maybe, because to really make everybody understand what is written there, people could use the Portuguese version, but still, I think it's not one single language. I think he maybe produces maybe a mixture of local languages. And he uses them in moments of extreme emotion, usually. That's it. Yeah, but unfortunately, I can't tell you which language it is.
Just one very short comment. Since most are Bantu languages, I think there is a certain possibility of understanding what is being said. So at least that's a bit my impression. And also Makua is like the most spoken language. So like a fourth, more or less, of the population speaks that language. And then since most of the other big languages are Bantu languages as well, I think it would be possible to understand for the rest of the people. Just as a short comment on that. There is, did you answer the question already completely, or did you want to comment? Then there is another question. Anna, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Yeah, so thank you so much for your paper. And I found it very interesting also as a, since we got the background of last week about Chikonyoka, and it was very good and interesting to see the combination of the two. I think it's very good also this sequential one panel definition, and I see a little bit of sequentiality developing through the captures and the bubble, the first capture, the bubble, the last capture. So in a way, you are right. It's something that is not maybe possible to put in the definitions that we normally use, but it's very interesting to to see what can we also define. My question is, so I work in the field of illiterate adults, so adults, so functional illiterates and so on, and I know that for adults that cannot read and write well, comics are a big challenge because they cannot recognize, or they cannot have the glimpse at the comic, and it's very confusing for them. So I think in this way, it would be very nice to see it as a good in between a comic and literacy materials. I think this is also why he decides to use a one panel, but I think this is suitable for adults that don't read and write well. And probably because there is this tradition of cartoons, they already recognize the elements of caption, of the speech bubble, and so on. So this was very enlightening for me, because for us, as practitioners in the educational field, it's very difficult to develop comics for adult learners, that are not used to reading them. It doesn't work in a way. And I have tomorrow to give also a speech about visual elements and easy language. And you only use visual elements as illustration of a text, but never as in comics as the main medium to bring informations, right? So my question would be for you is also, did you look also how images are used in education in Mozambique in general? So are they part of school books or other educational materials that because this is for me a question that I have also regarding other areas of the world. So how is the image education in people, you know? So how do they get acquainted to recognize some elements and so not only education in the sense of schooling, but also in the sense of images in the society. So this would be more of my question. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, Anna. I'm afraid I didn't go into that, how images are used in education in Mozambique in general. I read in the article of Pakalen, who is published in the book of Lent, the Cartooning in Africa book. He writes or he tells or speaks of a workshop he did in Mozambique where he tried to work with images and by images do political education with adults. And in the book, and in the whole book, not only in his article, but in the whole book, those examples are always presented as successful, as if the image really helped to grasp the intention and the ideas. But I'm skeptical, to be honest, because as I said, and as you already also said, that comics are completely different. It's not just the image or just the text, it's the interplay of image and text, which is highly abstract and yeah, you need cognitive resources to really catch those two, and routine as well. You need a certain routine in comic reading. So what I thought is that maybe people see just a picture, or people take just the text maybe at the beginning. Maybe the text is written out, read out aloud to other people. So maybe the comic reception is more collective. Like I have a friend and I'm interested, I'm curious because of the picture I see in the Jornal Domingo. And then I ask a friend to read the text which is written there. So maybe it's more a collective event. But I think the idea how a comic works with the interplay of text and image is not really well, it won't work in illiterate communities, I think, or with illiterate people, which are, well, a huge part of the population of Mozambique is not illiterate. That's not what I want to say, but I think he claims that his pictures do work also with illiterate people, and I'm skeptical about this because I think it might be just the pictures and not the interplay and the complexity of the comic to the fullest. And that's the same with the workshops Pakalen, for example, described. They say that they used pictures and that they used comics. And there is a tradition as well with Chiconyoka and with all the other images that came up during the liberation of Mozambique and Angola. Yeah, but I just repeat myself, but the interplay I think is not working to the fullest, maybe. Not sure if I answered your question.
Well, no, yes, because you agree also in a way with me that she was not looking for an agreement, but it's interesting that you also observe this linking between literacy and images and the challenges. So it's not as easy as we think to convey images, to convey education through images alone. It's always the context that makes probably the accessibility, right? And of course, literacy is there are some steps, right? So you have the full analphabet, but then you have people who read a little bit and then a little bit more and so on. And this is maybe also something that is makes it possible to have a collective experience, right? So as you were telling, so thank you so much also for this of mentioning this cartooning in Africa. I will look into it for sure. One thing where I see a lot of images in literacy works is instructional images. So they are very linked to learning something that you need for the job, and and it's something that you use every day. So in this way, I think in this sense, I do think that for technical and everyday life, images can be a big support. So very, very practical and very, yes. And there is probably, you know, this example by the Charité here in Berlin, when they developed a comics explaining how an operation is, an earth operation will take place, and it was very successful. And it's stent is the name of the operation that they have to take. And so I am, but it's, yeah, so yes, thank you. I could go on and on and on, but maybe I mute.
But one quick comment, I think the technical instructional comics are easier to read because the perspective is my own. Usually they are drawn from the perspective. I see the hands, I see the material I'm working with, so I don't need that much empathy as well to imagine that there is another person who is not me, and what is this person doing and thinking and why and how. So maybe that's working better or quicker than attitudinal instructional comics.
Yeah.
And of course, the literacy question in Mozambique is much more complex because, as Maria Paula Menezes also mentioned last week, we don't have only the Portuguese language, so literacy has to be thought through this mirror as well. If it is Portuguese literacy, if it is Bantu literacy, and what steps and levels, as you already said, are there, and how do they work together?
That's true, you're right. There are many languages to get literate in. Yeah, that's true.
And that's what I found very surprising, actually, particularly, which I like also about you having organized this Vorlesung in the way you did, because we have like these comparative approaches now, which is really, it really sheds a light also on Zimba's comics. And to me, they seem to be very idiosyncratical, actually. He has a very particular style. And some people have already, like Yasmin and Leah, have also commented on it, and you did as well. I mean, it's very dense. There are different layers. It's highly complex, and it's very much language-based, which I found very interesting because it's so different than the Chiconyorka. And so maybe, apart from this little comment, a question would be, do you know anything how actually the reception took place? Because Chiconyorka, actually he entered the collective imaginary, and he entered also public space. So he kind of left just the paper and kind of entered the public space, being painted on walls and all that, right? And then having like his son and all that. So it really became a big thing. So there is this tradition, but I wonder if this really works on Zimba's comics so well, because it's so complex and he has all these different types. I mean, he works with social types, which I found very interesting as well, but they're so highly complex, even though he uses stereotypes. So it's quite a different project, and I found it very surprising, really, that he has this kind of immense complexity in a country where the reception is so fragmented by all the different languages and by the problem of illiteracy. So yeah, that'd be my question basically. How do you see that?
Well, I can't answer the question on the reception. Unfortunately, I would love to answer them because the question, because it would mean that I know the Mozambican reality. Unfortunately, I don't. So I think, yes, it's maybe not that easy for his comics to be part of the collective memory as Chikonyoka, because as you already said, it's much more complex. There is so much more to, well, in there. On the other hand, he's part of the public perception since 1990. He started working at Jornal Domingo 30 years ago, which is quite a long time. And Jornal Domingo is a huge newspaper in Mozambique, so many people read it. And I think he is known, and he also is commenting on that he has a certain fame and people know his drawings, and his style actually is really recognizable, his drawing style. But there is no figure like Chikonyoka which could like leave the comics and have a life on its own in Mozambican everyday life reality. So yeah, I think maybe it's harder for the figures, or for single figures to leave the comic and have their own life. But still, he's really famous and known in Mozambique. And yes, the question of language-based comics is interesting, because even in the context of literacy and illiteracy, that's an interesting thing to discuss, that his comics are really full of language, actually. There's so much language, and not always, but in most of the panels, you have to read quite a lot. That's interesting. And I was just thinking about the aesthetics, because you mentioned his drawing style as well, and we talked about translation, and I think he has this distinct drawing style, but I'm not sure if it would work in Europe, actually, because I think European aesthetics maybe don't really fit with his style of drawing, but I'm not sure. Maybe we could discuss on that afterwards. Because we are much more used to drawings like the ones from Sergio Zimba, with colors and well, not so many straight lines. Even the people Zimba's painting or drawing have very strict and harsh lines. It's not that round and easygoing. So I'm not sure if his aesthetics would work apart from the language and language situation and the translations. The most recent comic, by the way, from yesterday, is in 3 languages, because it's a visit to the US, and so there is English, there is the local Bantu language, and there is Portuguese. There are Portuguese subtitles. So he's always playing with the languages as well, and I think that would be hard to translate as well. Yeah, sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I was just, yeah, I have so many thoughts on his paintings and his style and yeah, the way he's perceived, but unfortunately I can't say how the images are entering the public or cultural memory of Mozambique. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I actually do have another one. I'm very curious about the idiosyncrasy of his comics and his artwork, and I think it has something like panels for films, for example, a little bit on one hand, and then on the other hand, because it's very like detailed and it's creating space so much, also the depth of the space. And then on the other hand, he has these comical elements always, usually kind of a caricature of corporeal elements, especially the face or the organs that are kind of connoted as having sexual importance in a way. So he uses that also for getting the humor out of it. But my actual question would be, because I hardly know any of these types of comics that are educational comics, and if there are any predecessors in this kind of style, or do you know anything that would be similar? Because for me, it's really, I have never seen anything quite like it, and I'm really, really taken by it. I think it's an amazing artwork, actually.
That's a hard question. I know that, well, I'm not sure what your question is aiming at, because just talking about the educational comics on health crises and HIV and the sexual components, then I was thinking of a South African comic who is explaining sexual prevention, not to get the HIV virus, and this is much more in the style of a photo novel, maybe a drawn novel, but really soft and nice and romantic. Actually, there is a lot of romanticism and romantic love, and even if there is romantic love, we have to pay attention on the sexual behavior and to avoid catching HIV, which is completely different. Zimba's pictures are much more sexually overloaded as well. And I can't remember any status of this kind of style in educational comics. But maybe anyone else in the audience has an idea, because I'm just thinking on the other ones. But his idea is to be very Mozambican. Like, for example, in this book, Lagunas Chihizo, he even says that he tries to represent a humor and a picture from Mozambique, which is typical to Mozambique and which is recognizable at one glance as Mozambican. So maybe that's why it's so hard to compare it to other works, because he's succeeding with this idea of really taking up with Mozambican aesthetics and humor and lifestyle and problems and all the situations in the country. And that's why it's so dense, I think.
I can't speak for the African continent, I'm sorry. But there is a book called Comics Meets Science, where Nick Suzanis was also writing an essay about comics explaining or educating. So also this is a different, do you need a comic to explain something, or do you want to educate? Also on that topic we could discuss a lot. But what he was saying, and I do agree with him, is that in educational comics you find a lot of talking heads. So talking heads, so just a person and then a big balloon full of words. So, and this is, I think, international, because I work on comics from Arab countries, and there are some children comics there. Also, when they have education in mind, it's a lot of words and less pictures. So this is the children book things, and some nice examples of comics explaining things are the ones in German about the Helmholtz-Gesellschaft, but they are high complex. So they are about sciences, natural sciences, and they have this entertainment element is there for sure, and they have comics because they have sequential. But I'm sorry, I don't know much about other ones. Yeah, cartoons, of course, in political education are used, I think, all over the world in a way. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned the big heads, Sergio Zimba used this style once or twice some years ago. And you can see that he tried to work with big heads speaking and reducing the scene or the situation, but he did this just for a quick period of time. And then he went back to his original style of drawing a whole situation and the complexity and density and the spatial, giving all the spatial information.
Great, that's so interesting. Is there one final question, anyone? All right, then it's already 3:30. So thank you very much, Janek, for this very inspiring presentation and all the discussions as well. I've learned a lot. It was really inspiring for me. And yeah, do you want to still say something, Janek?
Thank you very much for having me, but actually, yeah.
Having yourself.
Yeah, but thanks for joining the lecture series, because I think it's so important to broaden the view on Lusophone comics, because we talk about Brazilian comics a lot, and there is a lot to talk about actually. But yes, there is also a lot of work from Africa, from Lusophone Africa, and the relationship between Portugal and the former colonies of Portugal, which I think Lea mentioned before, which gains more interest. And that's maybe the bridge to the next section of the lecture series, which is on Portugal. And we have Julia Gahayo. She will present comics from Portugal talking about the colonial issues. So maybe that fits quite good to today's session and the session from last week. So yeah, continue joining and thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.